My statement this morning is entitled Time to Decide and will focus on the Caribbean Economic Review and our vision for Caribbean economies and the necessary policy responses as we see them. However, the presentation will begin by presenting the very important global context within which these countries operated in 2015 and the global outlook for 2016. Let me begin with the global economic outlook. 2015 was a challenging year for the global economy. Global economic growth fell from 3.4% to 3.1%. The main reason was a slowdown in China, which along with other events kept commodity prices low, impacting exporters of those products. Growth in the United Kingdom, in the United States and Canada was revised down during the year, with only the US showing higher growth than in 2014. The International Monetary Fund predicts that growth will be higher in 2016 than in 2015, with the notable exception of China. However, it should be noted that since October 2015, the IMF has revised down its growth forecast. Global forecasts will now be estimated at 3.4%, down from 3.6% as was forecast in October 2015. There is considerable uncertainty, a toxic cocktail of downside risk as shown by this slide. But let me focus on some of these factors influencing the global outlook. There is geopolitical uncertainty related to the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or commonly known as ISIS, and there's also uncertainty associated with what's happening within Ukraine and North Korea. The markets are also uneasy since the beginning of the year. The Standard & Poor's 500 index is down by about 6%. Japan's Nikkei index is down by about 15%. Shanghai Composite Index is off by about 19%. And Germany's DAX down by approximately 7% since the beginning of the year. In China, there's a gradual slowdown and rebalancing of economic activity away from investment and manufacturing towards consumption and services. There was tightening in monetary policy towards the end of last year in the United States. However, there is considerable uncertainty as to whether further tightening will occur in that economy, given concerns about the resilience of the US recovery. The oil price is characterized by uncertainty, with significant implications of low prices for producers' budgets and a possible boost to consumers' real income in the oil-importing countries. Possible instability in Europe, particularly caused by the possibility of a Brexit, a referendum of which is looming on June 23rd. This uncertainty has already led to a decline in the value of the pound. The Zika virus, as we've been hearing recently, is also a concern, particularly for tourist markets here in the Caribbean. If we look closer to home, the Brazilian economy is expected to contract in 2015 as well as in 2016. The effects on that country of the Zika virus constitute a further downside risk, especially given the scheduled Olympic Games. Colombia is still growing, but the IMF has revised its forecast down. There are also significant difficulties being experienced in Venezuela due to lower oil prices. Here at home, CDB's borrowing member countries, the unweighted average growth for the period 2006 to 2015 was only 1.5%. As this chart shows, this compares with the average of small island developing states, which was much higher at 3.4%. For 2015, regional economies grew by just 1%. Trinidad and Tobago, which accounts for about a third of the regional economy, if Trinidad and Tobago, which grew by only 0.2%, is removed from this equation, then the growth is a bit higher at 1.4%. But, should I dare say, nothing to shout about. But there were stellar performances from Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, and the Turks and Caicos Islands, which all grew in excess of 4%. However, as Dr. Smith mentioned earlier, low growth persists elsewhere. There were notable declines in Dominica, due to Storm Erica, which impacted that country in 2015. So in this backdrop, why are Caribbean economies' growth still so low? A comparison of CDB's BMCs with other country groupings suggests that structural problems may be the obvious explanation. BMCs perform less well than other small island developing states, which suggests that size may not be the main challenge affecting regional economies. All in all, structural deficiencies in Caribbean economies remain. I will say more on this later on. As we look deeper into what is driving growth, visitor numbers were up in most of our borrowing member countries. This is good, but on its own is not good enough. In Barbados, visitor numbers grew by nearly 15%, but this translated into an increase of value added of just 0.9%, which means that tourist expenditure has stalled, along with a drop in the length of stay and a reduction in government employment. Commodity producers are feeling the negative effects of a price decrease as external accounts become negative. This chart shows what has happened to commodity prices since January 2014. So with this decline in commodity prices, government budgets have become constrained. Indeed, lower commodity prices resulted in significant external liquidity challenges for Suriname, causing a depletion of reserves and the need for a comprehensive fiscal adjustment. In Trinidad and Tobago, there was a similar impact, but healthy fiscal buffers allowed for more resilience in this instance. On the fiscal side, debt continues to be a concern, but we have had improvements with the exception of Jamaica, Grenada, and St. Kitts and Nevis. Debt increased in relation to gross domestic product in all of the BMCs in 2015. With respect to external balances, as measured by foreign exchange reserves in 2015, we saw declines in Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Haiti, Belize, and Suriname, and increases in Bahamas, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, and Jamaica. The recommended threshold, I should say, of reserves is that it should cover 3 months of imports. All BMCs except Suriname are above this threshold. The Surinamese authorities have approached the IMF recently to discuss the possibility of IMF financial support for their economic reform program in response to the sharp fall in international commodity prices. Several important policies have already been implemented in the context of this program with a view to strengthening the level of the international reserves and paving the way for the economy to achieve sustained growth and financial stability. Let me now say something about unemployment in the region. In the region, high levels of unemployment are still of concern. Data is scarce, but in those countries for which we have data, unemployment is in double digits in most countries. The CDB study on youth unemployment published in 2015 found that the region has some of the highest youth unemployment in the world. The study found a number of factors contributing to this, including the state of the economy, the structure of the labor market, lack of relevant skills and lack of experience, insufficient mobility, and insufficient knowledge of vacancies. To some extent, high unemployment reflects the need for greater labor market flexibility. Lack of productivity is also a major concern since it has a major impact and certainly a correlation with high per capita GDP growth. Once more, the data is scarce. The red dots in this chart are BMCs, namely St. Lucia, Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. The growth in labor productivity is low for the countries identified here, and this is highly correlated with low growth rates, which in turn we know is correlated with high unemployment levels. Within this chart, we also highlight Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Hong Kong, and Singapore as comparators for you to compare. Let me turn now to doing business in the Caribbean. So along with high levels of unemployment and low productivity, doing business is still very difficult in the Caribbean. There are only 2 BMCs in the top 80 ranked countries in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business survey. BMCs score very poorly against Singapore, the top-ranked country. The survey is clear why board member countries rank where they do. Taking into account metrics such as time and cost to start a business, ease of getting construction permits, ease of trading across borders, ease of paying taxes, among others. But there are some encouraging signs. Both Jamaica and Jamaica improved their ranking. I should note that while many of our countries have tried to improve the factors that have an impact on the ease of doing business, other countries are improving faster. And CDB's 2016 research on medium, small, and micro enterprises and port infrastructure will go some way in providing appropriate policy responses to this dilemma. Along with this, logistics and transport is also an area of concern for us here. The World Bank's Logistics Performance Index, LPI for short, measures the quality of transport and logistics services based on 6 core dimensions: customs infrastructure, international shipments, logistics, competence, tracking and tracing, and timeliness. The overall average reflects the average across the 6 dimensions. The chart here shows that the Caribbean region's average score on the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index was lower than in any other region. All Caribbean countries except the Bahamas performed below the Latin American average on the LPI components. This suggests that the weak development of trade logistics might be a factor explaining poor trade performance. A CDB study on ports aims to identify ways in which they can become more efficient based on the most common metrics. This report will be published later this year in May. Initial indications are that regional ports are inefficient. For example, regional ports are spending around 65% of operating costs on labor. The generally accepted benchmark for ports of a similar size is about 50%. So in light of all of this information that I've provided, what is CDB's outlook for our BMCs? We are forecasting growth of around just 0.3% in 2016, down from 1% in 2015, and 1.6% in 2014. Excluding Trinidad and Tobago, the forecast goes up to 1.7%, up from 1.4% in 2015. Most BMCs are expected to grow in 2016. But significantly, as Dr. Smith mentioned earlier, Trinidad and Tobago will contract, as well as Suriname. But there are risks in 2016, as we see them for our board member countries. Besides the global risk identified earlier, there is a possibility of a global economic downturn, political uncertainty in Venezuela, the risk and opportunities of continued warming US-Cuba relations. Only last week, we saw that commercial flights will resume between those countries, perhaps later this year. There's also the potential threat of the Zika virus and its impact on tourism arrivals. Commodity exporters will need to make difficult decisions about their expenditure patterns, and our research shows that tourism arrivals from the US tend to decline during the year of a US presidential election. Olympics in Rio de Janeiro could also divert tourists away from the Caribbean. The reduction in correspondent banking relationships is also a threat to financial transactions, and thus trade and remittance receipts. And in the Caribbean, the usual possibility of environmentally related events, in particular storms and hurricanes, are ever looming against our BMC economies. So I now turn to what is the Caribbean Development Bank's vision. Given this backdrop of sluggish growth, low productivity, and high unemployment, we ask, what should the vision be for our economies? We think at the Caribbean Development Bank that it is time to decide. That is to say, we need dynamic, export-oriented, competitive, inclusive, diverse, environmentally resilient economies. That is to say, it is time for us to decide. We believe that this can be achieved if we move towards private sector-led growth, an educated and flexible labor force, greater regional integration where government acts as a facilitator and efficient regulator, and sustained energy security with renewable energy and energy efficiency playing important roles. So what are some of the policy actions required to assist us in moving towards this new economy? Number one, we need a strategy that will allow us to take advantage of innovation. At the same time, we need to improve the investment climate, making it easier for the private sector to thrive. That is to say, doing business reforms. 3, labor market reforms, increased flexibility, the freedom and movement of labor, and participation and productivity at all levels. So we really need to increase the productivity of labor within our region. Human capital development, investment in quality education for all. And I need to really emphasize this. It's important that we have quality education at all levels and for all our students. And we should also have a serious emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math, the so-called STEM subjects. Number 5, we must maintain the fiscal consolidation that has already begun in many of our countries and which we think needs to begin in some of our other borrowing member countries. This means that we should advocate for fiscal rules, increase efficiency of revenue collection and expenditure, and prioritize capital and investment and the reform of subsidies. It is also important that we improve the level of national savings to support investment and fiscal buffers. 7, although we have low fuel prices now, as indicated by the chart on what has been happening with commodity prices, we still need energy reform that will improve our energy security through the use of renewable energy and the energy mix, and greater energy efficiency for oil and non-oil producers alike. We also need a policy environment that insists micro, small, and medium enterprises, such as improved access to credit and funding. 9, targeted and affordable social protection. This is applicable to social safety nets, transfers, and subsidies. 10, maximize regional integration and take advantage of free trade agreements such as the Economic Partnership Agreement already agreed to, and try to seek out new agreements for our products and services. Number 11, improve regional transport and logistics. And here I really want to emphasize that it is very important for us to increase the efficiency of the movement of our people and goods across the region, both by air and by maritime transport. Number 12, measures required to minimize the spread of diseases. And I should end off here by saying that it is very important for us to also advocate that we need to have codes for buildings and for infrastructure so that we can build in resilience into all of our infrastructure, given the very real dangers associated with natural disasters in the region. I should end there. Thank you.